Welcome back to Shredders Not Dead. If they make you bang your head, we'll talk with them or about them. And I'm joined today by Anders Odden of Cadaver and also from Satyricon fame. And we're here to talk about the new Cadaver record. How
Thank
you
you.
doing
Yeah,
today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent to hear it. So Age of the Offender drops soon, the new record. And I have to say, it's got a really, really cool sound. It's death metal, but it's also a little bit it's its own thing a little bit. It's got this like sharp sound to it, but it's kind of buzzy and maybe a little trippy as well. Do you want to just take us a little bit through your musical vision for it? I'll start you off with an easy question.
No, yeah, I wanted to make something brand new and also very old at the same time. So I wanted to incorporate sort of psychedelic, sci-fi, post-apocalyptic feel to the whole thing. And I think we very much did what we were trying to do, which was to make very intense, very sophisticated, but also very real recording.
Mm.
And when you say trippy, it's a good way to describe it because it is definitely very trippy. I'm not supposed to recommend tripping to anyone, but if you are going to do that, this is a pretty scary album to trip to, I would say. It is super intense. It could be very illuminating, but it also could be like a roller coaster ride from hell. I don't know which one you prefer. If you prefer your trips really scary, it's definitely a lot of things in there that will keep you awake at night.
Always been a big fan of the duality of the term profound, profund to
Yeah.
the Latin, deep and meaningful, deep and dark. I think this sort of goes into that territory, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's literally, I mean, if you have you read the lyrics yet? No, probably
I
not.
haven't had access to the lyrics, but I could make out a lot of them listening to it, so I know roughly where the album goes.
Yeah. So the song called Death Revealed is very much inspired lyrically by DMT. And the song called Dissolving Chaos is very much inspired by psilocybin. So that's two direct links to trippiness, lyrics wise. And other than that, it's obviously the human condition. You're probably gonna ask me a lot of questions about different things, so I'll let you ask more questions.
No, it's good. It's a good spot to have a conversation here, I find. So if you got a thought, just run with it, mate, and wherever we end up, we end up. But
Yeah,
as
sure. No, yeah. No, the whole, the way the album kicks off as well was a very important factor for me because it's uh basically the same trombone player that did the first Cadaver intro ever on Hallucinating Anxiety. And back then, when we named the album Hallucinating Anxiety, we didn't really know what hallucinating anxiety was. We only had the experience from basically smoking weed or stuff like that and getting drunk. But I wanted to make something that sounded like the 1920s with the turmoil back then in the world, which seems eerily similar to what we're going through now with the pandemic and then wars and all kinds of strange things happening in the world. So the trombone being an instrument that is rarely used in metal, it has this eerie sound. Actually, brass in itself is an interesting thing, but the way the haunting melody sounds in this soundscape of very trippy guitars, this wall of sound makes it sound like I've sampled something from the 1920s, but it's written in its entirety for this album, so it makes the whole thing kick off in a way that makes you think that you're going into a different kind of world, and that's what we're trying to make here, this strange world of Cadaver that only sounds like Cadaver. So it introduces you to 45 minutes. So very, very different soundscapes than you're normally used to from metal bands.
Mm. And a few examples of brass come to mind, but the main ones I think in metal have always been, black metal, Casio keyboard horns, and that's a completely different vibe entirely. Can be cool. I think Emperor did it well, but other than maybe, the one Behemoth record that used French horn, and I think an Isan record or two has saxophone on it, you're right. The in the person brass just it's intimate, but it's dangerous at the same time. And I think that's what's really cool about metal as well. And I think that you introduce this album really well with that. But in a jazz setting rather than like a chamber music setting, if you will.
Yeah, but as we're all metal fans, this instrument is actually entirely made of metal, and guitars are not. They're made of wood. So are drums. So there's nothing more metal than the trombone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's literally just metal making the sound.
Yeah, songwriters out there take note. I'll throw a hardball question at you now, and this is one that I've played around with a little bit, listening to, I think Decapitated had a similar theme to their most recent album, and there's a few people talking about, what it means to be offended and where things like cancel culture and all that are heading. The flip side to that is I would like to think as a metal community, we're all pretty thick-skinned. Maybe you disagree. But how do you approach this? And I do think this record does it well. But how do you approach this topic, running the risk maybe a little bit of preaching to the converted? Or is this just your personal frustration and you don't really give a damn what the listener thinks if they already agree with you or not?
I think it's not really my personal frustration, other than I'm trying to actually make fun of the whole concept. And the way to make fun of things is to show them in your face. And I think this time and age, people are super nervous about saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, and or even just the wrong thing to anyone. And I've never really understood how the concept of being liked by everybody works, because being into metal, it means that you take a choice of being, into something that is very niche, and you take an active stand against being liked by everybody by liking metal. And when we grew up, it was maybe just a few people at any school that liked this kind of music or even knew about this music. And now it's even more important to be able to do whatever you like and focus on what you can do yourself, rather than pointing fingers at other people doing the wrong thing, or whatever you think about other ideas or politics or religions or whatever. There's a few really good humor, how should I say? Like Ricky Gervais is probably one of my current favorites when it comes to this. And the way he is saying things on the edge isn't really that much on the edge. It's on the edge in the time and age we are in now. But whatever he's saying would correlate very well with what Monty Python did in the 70s. And back then, people got really offended too. Norway actually was one of the few countries that banned Life of Brian for blasphemy, which is hilarious because it is a film about the stupidness of the concept of blasphemy. But, all that stuff, like Ricky Gervais said very well in one interview I just saw, the extremists in the most peaceful religion in the world would be extremely peaceful. And he's pointing out a lot of these things, which I find strange now. Like the most strange thing, I think, is how people in general are worried about things like trance, which I find so strange, because if you look at bands from the early 80s, like Twisted Sister or Motley Crue, or, and imagine having a band looking like Motley Crue on Shout at the Devil right now. I'm pretty sure they would be cancelled immediately somehow. It would offend a lot of people. They did it back then to offend a lot of people, but that was a good thing. Now that's a bad thing, which I find so strange and humorous. So I think you just need to get through this period we live in now and grow up, basically. Stop being so childish about everything. Life is too important to be taken seriously.
The interesting thing I've always found about heavy metal in particular is it seems to run this line between bands wanting to become more and more extreme and more inaccessible in response to metal in general becoming more popular versus bands maybe trying to gain a larger audience. And I think that the worst thing you can do is actually think about that stuff at all.
Oh, yeah.
And the best thing you can do is just do what you want to do and don't care if you're going to get called a sellout or you're going to be called an extremist either way in the context of heavy metal, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole concept of credibility lies entirely in the eye of the beholder as well, because if anyone starting out right now, let's say there's a 13-year-old getting inspired by whatever we are doing and other people are doing and decides to pick up a guitar or whatever and starts to make music, the first thing you start with when you make music on your own is to try to please yourself, and that's to see if you can even play something that is exciting for yourself. And if you take that part away from it, it takes away the whole concept of actually making something interesting. The only thing interesting I can make is things I think is interesting myself. And I really, really mean that. And if that correlates with some sort of audience somewhere, I'm never concerned to find my audience. I'm more concerned to, be true to myself, because if you're really true to yourself and that shines through, you will find the right audience for that somehow. It's never really, don't worry about being successful ever, because that's probably not going to happen anyway. And if it happens, it will be for a little while or whatever. The most important thing is to do things for yourself. Yeah.
Well said. Recently, we had another death metal band from Norway on, Rune, and the topic came up, as it does it a lot in the Norwegian death metal space, I suppose, of this similar sort of idea where I think you get these comparisons to the black metal scene a lot. And I think to some extent, the black metal scene in Norway was so extreme and was so explosive in the couple of years that it was really the true cult years, if you will, for want of a better term. Do you find that tribalism in terms of both the other musicians you work with or the fans is still a thing? Do you try and ignore it? How do you approach that sort of stuff?
Well, I'm too deep in from the old days to even know really the true difference anymore, because all the very, the oldest Norwegian bands, which is still somehow the biggest bands, anyone like Mayhem or Immortal or Emperor or Dark Throne, what they all have in common is that they didn't give a damn and did their own thing. And to be boxed in one genre for most musicians is more like a prison than freedom. When people are saying that Dark Throne used to be death metal, then they were black metal, and now they're punk, and now they're heavy, I'm like, how do you think they think about themselves? They don't give a fuck. They just play what they like. So your problem is that you try to box them within specific genres at the time, and that also changes over time. If you listen to really old stuff, I mean really old stuff like 80s stuff, when it comes to metal, it's pretty obvious to me is that Rain in Blood by Slayer is a thrash metal album, but it's also the door gateway to death metal.
Mm.
And I think the distinction between those genres lie more in the attitude and the way things are actually composed as well. I think one way to look at it is if you make your music from some sort of tradition where it's basically somehow folk music in a new way, it will be whatever it is. I think it's if you're true to your musical heritage from where you come from, like us from Norway, we're all inspired by all kinds of weird things, which has nothing to do with metal, like classical music, like Grieg and Halvorsen, and all this folk music as well. The way the melodies are going, or the rhythmical parts and stuff like that. If you base your music from your musical heritage and your background, it will sound much more true to whatever that is. If it's then regarded as death metal or black metal nowadays, I'm not so sure about where those differences really are, because also the whole thing with black metal being like satanic in the 80s and 70s, there were a lot of occult bands and doom bands doing all these themes, but more to, provoke and be actually offensive and to stir up things in society. And the whole Satanism thing was never really so tempting to me, because the whole idea of Satan is basically a Christian idea, and it's like a very closed environment to make things from. But if you lift it up a little bit and are more concerned about the human condition in itself, there's many more topics to be found, and to demand being taken seriously all the time is also very boring to me. It's life is much more interesting if it's both being serious and goofy at the same time. And some artists are able to do that really well and get away with it, like Abba from Immortal. He's a bona fide black metal artist, but the way he behaves and sound in interviews and whatever is much more like Ozzy Osbourne or some goofy punk from the UK in the 70s. All this humor part of the whole thing is also very important to me. So I think to be humorless and very super serious in a juvenile, stupid way, it's just not really cutting it for me. It has to have more depth.
I definitely find it attracts a type of fan who maybe take themselves a little bit too seriously as well. And I think that if you do that, it becomes maybe threatening to see someone who is free to take things a bit more serious. I think we all, definitely the people I grew up around, all went through a phase in their sort of mid to late teens where you take on this nihilistic view of the world, and it's a very depressive nihilistic view. And I'd like to think in the last 10 years that I've done a lot of work to shift that into an absurdist, fun, nihilistic view, because it's very easy to have fun when you realize that life doesn't matter is a really positive statement.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're all just here for a little while, so why not make the best of it? You'll die eventually and see how that goes. It's not really that interesting to be dead.
That we know of.
Yeah, that we know. And it might be interesting. Somebody said like eternity is a very long time, especially towards the end. So I hope there is an end to this, but I'm not, I don't need to go into the grave anytime soon. I just know that we all have limited time, and what I'm going to do for the rest of my life is to try to do as much interesting things as possible for myself.
bring it back a
Yeah.
little bit more to Cadaver and the music side of things.
Sure.
Obviously, you've had a long stint Satyricon, and you've done a bunch of other musical appearances and projects. Feel free to elaborate if you want. Do you find it? How do you find it different when it comes to Cadaver in terms of being, the main driving force of the band, if you want to use that term, versus being along for the ride?
Oh, it's a different thing, obviously. It's
Mm.
more appealing to me to just do my own thing now than ever. I've learned a lot from being with other bands, and I learned a lot of things about myself from being in other bands. Uh, and I bring that into where I'm currently at, of course. One thing which I'm really happy that I have done is to play shows all around the world several times. So now I don't need to do that to fulfill any dream I have. Now I will focus on recording and taking the band out live when it makes sense. Obviously, with this time and age we're living in now, it's much harder to actually just travel and do all that stuff. But I've renovated my studio so I can be in my studio, have also other artists coming to my studio to record. So I'm in a phase in life now where I'm more happy than ever to just be able to do music as much as I can and see what happens, basically. And when it comes to live shows, we've done actually quite a few live shows with Cadaver the last few years locally here and some festivals in Europe and America. So we will definitely be out on the road, but I don't need to do that as the full-time thing I did for a long time in any sort of way. And I find it very rewarding to actually stay focused on making music and learning more and more about how to record music. I've been doing that all my life too, but you never stop to learn something, which is really interesting. So learning something new all the time is always good.
One thing I did want to touch on, the album cover for Age of the Offended is fantastic. Just wondering if you could talk us through it a little bit. Oh, hey, look, there we go.
The LP.
Looks even better pressed to vinyl.
Yeah. No, it's the album cover is basically a collage, and I wanted to make it a real collage, and I found this amazing artist in Norway. Actually, it's a woman. Her name is Flesh Flies on Instagram if you want to check all her stuff out. And she's basically taking photos, print them out, and put them back together again in collages, as album covers used to be done in the 80s, especially. One that comes to mind is, of course, Carcass, first album, and Napalm Death. And I wanted it to be a real collage and not this Photoshop or AI thing that is very popular right now. Also to make it stand out more and to also possibly inspire people, because it's this time and age, it's more important to be personal and unique in your approach to anything than anything else, because anyone can just type in something on their computer and get some results out that looks really cool spontaneously, but then you think, maybe like 1 million people are doing the same thing. Maybe that's not so interesting then. So I'm really happy that we could do this very old school, and it sure looks like nothing else I've seen for a long time. It's yeah, I'm very happy about the cover sleeve for sure.
Yeah, it does immediately grab your attention, doesn't it? It's quite cool. There's a Ramones one, I think, as well, that comes to mind that is also very, very nice. That I can't remember the name of right now, but yeah, it's interesting that with the AI stuff, it seems that people go one or two ways in terms of how they're bringing it into metal at the moment. It seems that people are either taking it to the extreme and trying to use it to, as you say, to ridicule something or to maybe warn about something. The best way to do it is to just shove it in your face and say, look at this thing, and caricature it almost. But it does also, I think, from my point of view, make me appreciate the hands-on stuff a little bit more. I find the more we can do with technology, the more I like to listen outside of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it also goes with recording. I had a rock band in my studio a few months back, and they are in their early 30s or late 20s, and they have never really recorded as a live band in the studio playing together and being recorded before, because
Mm.
now everybody just sit with their computer and record some riffs, and they program drums, and then the drummer teaches how to play the drums from the program drums, and then they go out and play, and it always sounds less human and less interesting. Back in the day when we had to record everything on tape, you had to rehearse so much that you knew how the songs would go through the whole song and record the whole song. The first album we did was recorded onto a 4-track cassette tape, where the drums, bass, and the first guitar was recorded as one. And doing that now, I can see the challenge for young musicians, because they then realize that maybe we didn't rehearse enough for this, maybe the song aren't really ready arrangement-wise, or whatever happens, then you suddenly realize that being a musician is also about being confident about me being a musician, and confidence comes with basically letting go of your thoughts and just play. And I think that's also shines through on this album, that it's really played by human beings and not programmed in any way. Everything you hear is musicians playing all the sounds on there. There's actually absolutely no synth on the album, except from a little bit on the intro. But that's a story on itself. But other than that, everything is guitars, and I wanted to push how guitars can also sound like nothing you ever heard. Sounds like trippy. That's a word that comes to mind. And
Yep,
to be able
definitely.
to do that without any synth. I'm not against synth at all. I'm using that all the time in other things, but I really want Cadaver to be a organic sounding band, and to push that direction is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think you've definitely nailed that feel on this latest record. It's organic, human, feels very alive, and it's a good thing, I think.
Oh yeah, totally.
All right, Anders, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show. If you've got any last thoughts, hit us with it now.
Yeah, I want to say to the Australian Cadaver fans that we really would like to come to Australia one day, but until then, enjoy the new album, The Age of the Offended, and we'll see how the future brings us. Yeah, is there any festivals, like metal festivals, still going on in Australia?
So we had Download here, and I don't know if that's going to continue. That sort of got stuffed a bit with COVID. And then we had Knotfest here, the Slipknot run festival that sort of filled the void last year. So maybe one of those would be a good option. Other than that, there's one called Good Things, but that tends to take more of a pop punk alternative approach. So you get a lot of bands like Deftones, although Soulfly were there last year. But then you get a lot of like, The Offspring and bands in that sort of vein.
I see. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yep. Sounds good.
Right.
Thanks for your time, Anders.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.